This is the How Did We Get Here podcast with your host, Nancy Jackson.
Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to this podcast called How Did We Get Here? And I have a special guest today. And before I introduce her, I want to kind of set the stage for the background for what we're going to talk about. It's really about the sexual revolution and the root of abortion and the role that Kate Millett played in that. And not everyone is going to remember her name, but she was the founder of the National Organization for Women. The acronym was NOW, N-O-W. And I want to kind of set the stage for what led up to that. First of all, Russia was the first country in the world to legalize abortion. They did this in 1920. And in 1930, the Lambeth Conference of Worldwide Gathering of Protestant Denominations met and approved contraception for the first time in 1800 years. And then before that, everyone had accepted natural, there were a lot of big families, there's no question about it, but there was no such thing as artificial birth control. So, and then there was Adolf Hitler, who really came into prominence in the 1930s. And what he did to destroy the respect for human life was just terrible. He destroyed so many lives, and he did horrible experiments, dehumanizing experiments on those that he captured in the name of science. And he used that as his justification for just doing terrible things to human beings. And then there was Albert Kinsey in the 1940s, and he was a zoology professor at Indiana University. And he started the Institute for Sex Research and interviewed a lot of people to put together what he called the Kinsey reports. The irony was that a lot of the people, and most of the people, he couldn't get people to be his interview subjects. So he went to the prisons and used prison inmates to interview, to get his data, to put his reports together. Anyway, it was just one more thing that broke down the resistance to any kind of sexual resistance or mores. And then in the 1950s, there was the recognition of the problem with communism. And there was a lot of attempts to control it and to stop it. But by that time, communism was well embedded into our culture. And then in 1963, the birth control pill was made available to the public. Up until that time, mainstream Americans used natural forms of spacing childbirth, but families, for the most part, were large. It was often people had 7, 8, 10 children. Large families were very common and well accepted. Then Kate Millett came along and founded the National Organization for Women. And Time magazine called her the Karl Marx of the women's movement. Her sister, Mallory Millett, witnessed firsthand what took place with Kate Millett, her sister. And that's who I'm going to introduce to you today. And that is Mallory Millett, who is still alive today and is here to give us her account of what really happened when she lived with her sister and during the late 1960s and early 70s. Now, Mallory today is the longest standing board member of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. And David Horowitz is one of the most preeminent anti-communists in America today. And Mallory is still active and is a strong, strong supporter of this anti-communist resistance. And so that's who I want to introduce to you now. And I want you to hear Mallory's account of what really happened. Mallory, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Nancy. Good afternoon.
Well, I think what I should do is just let you talk and give your story, because I've heard it before and I was just amazed when I heard it. But I think, and I've been wanting to share it with other people. And so why don't you just go ahead and tell your story?
Well, my sister Kate and I grew up in the same room together in a very Catholic family in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the 40s and 50s. She was born in 1934. I was born in 1939, and from the moment I was brought home from the maternity ward, I was put in the same room with this person who was 5 years older than I, and I've always told people that I think she was desperately sick from very early childhood. I think a lot of things were overlooked by my family, and sort of she was treated like a slightly difficult person, but people just sort of coped. And so for 14 years, I shared a bedroom with a very, very, very disturbed personality. She grew up then to become a major general in the women's movement, the second great feminist movement, which really got off the ground around 1965 or so. Um, the thing that people have to really understand is that since the Russian Revolution in 1917, the big get for these people, the Bolsheviks and the people who drove this revolution, is America. America is the major get. If you get America, you get the world. That's it. You've taken down all freedom. Right from that moment, they've been working. There were people like Gramsci, various people who got involved in the Frankfurt School in Germany after World War II, combined with a bunch of them who ended up reverting to Columbia University in New York City, and they combined with such energies as Saul Alinsky, who came up in Chicago with his community organizing thing there, the people who created Barack Obama. He came out of the Saul Alinsky movement. The women's lib movement, the civil rights movement, these people all kind of coalesced there in the 60s. And this huge worldwide movement away from democracy and toward communism, toward socialism, really began its kickoff, a real kickoff into the world. The Which people have to understand is this is not just two different points of view that need to be fairly argued. It's like you're on two sides of a question. Either one of them is viable, but the people have to choose. That's kind of what it is. But it's not like that. This is not what that is. This is a fight between good and evil. And people say, "Oh, well, you're so absolute. You see things in black and white." No, 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 no. It's, do you believe in murder or not? There are things that we look at in black and white. And this sort of activity, everything that's been going on since they've been infiltrating our country, is very dark. It's not good. It's destructive. The whole point of it is to destruct Western civilization. When I was growing up, I ended up losing contact with Kate later. I got married. She went off to Columbia. She went off to Oxford University. She was doing her thing. I was off in Asia doing my thing. Later, I lived in the Orient for many years. So when I reunited with her after coming back to America in about 1969, I really didn't know her that well. I had loathed her as a child, as a roommate growing up, and I had never really. I had always been afraid of her. She was a terrible bully, and she uh, menaced me and terrorized me through my entire childhood because I keep trying to make people understand there are people all over the world who lionize her, who idolize her, and they don't understand that this is a person who is profoundly mentally ill. This is not just sibling rivalry here. It's something where I have a kind of a slightly ugly, difficult sister, and I'm setting her over here and saying, fie on her, she's terrible. It's nothing like that. This person was very seriously mentally ill. Our family spent many years trying to get her committed. I mean, seriously committed against her will in a mental institution where she could somehow maybe be straightened out and go back out into the world. But she eluded that through this entire thing that she died now in 2017, but from 1965 until 2017, she was wreaking havoc on this country, and a lot of people have never even heard of her, but they've certainly taken women's studies classes. And when Kate and now National Organization for Women bloomed in the mid 60s to late 60s, they were meeting at a place in Greenwich Village. A woman named Lila Karp had these meetings in her apartment where 12 to 14 Ivy League women, very, very substantial women, people who came from all of the best families in America, highly civilized, well educated, polite American women. A couple of them were black, they weren't all white, but they were upper class people who had been given all of the best advantages of this country has to offer. And their response to this was to form this group called the National Organization for Women and to sit around and plot the destruction of Western civilization. And I mean, I know it sounds preposterous, but it is, and it was. And there I was. I mean, I was a young woman. I was in my 20s, and I've come back from living in Asia for many years, and I'm suddenly in my sister's thrall and thinking what everything she's doing is wonderful because she's getting very successful in New York. They put her on the cover of Time magazine. She's doing all this stuff that I didn't really understand at first. And I got into the whole women's movement with her. And I had to sit around and watch these meetings where these women would openly and clearly plot the destruction of Western civilization. They put it that way. It isn't that I'm characterizing it as that. They were out to destroy Western civilization. Now, really, when I began to understand, what this was that they were really doing, I moved away. I made a lot of distance between these people and myself because I became a conservative. I voted for Ronald Reagan, but the things that I witnessed, they would have these meetings and they would sit around the table and they would do this sort of litany, kind of like a thing in the Catholic Church. This was in 1969. And I was living in her Bohemian Bowery loft as she was finishing her Columbia University PhD thesis, which was called Sexual Politics. So here we are at Lila Karp's house in Greenwich Village, 12 women gathered at a large table, and they were doing a kind of litany, but it was a litany of Marxism, not Christianity. And this is how it would go. They had this thing, it was a little ritual they did at the beginning of every meeting. Why are we here today? The chairwoman would ask. They had rotating chairwomen. You never wanted to have anybody be a star or anything, so because they were communists. So why are we here today? The chairwoman asked. To make revolution, the rest of them would answer. What kind of revolution? She replied. The cultural revolution, they would chant. And how do we make cultural revolution? She would demand. By destroying the American family, was their answer. Well, how do we destroy the family? She came back. By destroying the American patriarch, they cried exuberantly, very exuberantly. And how do we destroy the American patriarch, she probed? By taking away his power. How do we do that, she would ask. By destroying monogamy, they would shout. And how can we destroy monogamy? And so this was sort of like a drama that they would work up with that first little question, why are we here today? And by the time they were saying, how can we destroy monogamy, they were shouting, they were absolutely shouting their answers by this time. But when she asked, how do we destroy monogamy, this really left me breathless the first time I heard it. Their answer was, by promoting promiscuity, eroticism, prostitution, abortion, and homosexuality, they would yell. I mean, the first time I heard this, I thought I'd left planet Earth. I didn't know what the heck was going on anymore. One of these women was Kate Stimson, whose whose uncle, Stimson, was the Secretary of War under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So you can imagine the pressure she had to put up with when she entered liberal Ivy League college in the 60s. Oh, your uncle was the Secretary of War, you're a warmonger. So she had to prove that she was not like that. They were all there for compensatory reasons. They hate men, they had bad marriages, their uncle was Secretary of War and they had to live that down. They're all there for reasons that are sort of dubious in the first place. So this is what I was witness to. And I sat there and watched as these women did this, because their answer to, she would say, well, then how do we do that? How are we going to promote all of these things? And they said they would then, dissolve into a conversation showing that they were just hell-bent on destroying Western society because they wanted to infiltrate all of America's institutions. They would say, well, this is how we do it. This is how we promote homosexuality, promiscuity, eroticism, prostitution, and abortion, is that we infiltrate every institution in America. The media, the universities, the high schools, K-12, school boards, then the judiciary. We have to infiltrate the legislature. We have to infiltrate the executive branches, and even the library system. I thought that was so funny. The library system, of course, the library system. Now, so you have to remember this was 1969, and the country was just teeming with all sorts of exotic ideas like this based on degrading the bourgeoisie. I mean, Columbia University was coming up with groups inspired by Marx, Engels, Freud, the Frankfurt School, Wilhelm Reich, who wanted to sexualize people all the way down to infancy. They were having very heavy Vietnam protest marches all the time. At this point, everybody like Yoko Ono, John Lennon, all of these people, Angela Davis, Gloria Steinem, these people are all dignitaries, they were swarming around my sister Kate because she was called the godmother of the revolution. And everybody was so proud of her. Kate was the leader. She was taking us all to liberation. And then once she thought that she had pretty much instilled Marxist feminism in our culture, then she turned to what she called the Mental Patients Project, because her friends, not just her family, but many of her friends, her very far left friends even, had all tried to get her committed to a mental institution. And she would constantly elude us and constantly find ways to stay away from any kind of commitment. And so she formed a thing called the Mental Patients Project in New York City. And she and her little Mental Patients Project committee did the same thing that she did with feminism. They did this movement. They were, processing people, getting all sorts of people involved, which eventually resulted in New York City Council getting together and voting to release every single person in every psychiatric ward in New York. So there became a day when every single mental patient in every psychiatric facility in New York City was put on the streets in one day. In one day, we had the normal New York City streets, and in the next day, the streets had all sorts of mental patients all over them, and some of them lying on the sidewalk. Many of them had nowhere to go. Gangs were putting out cigarettes on them and beating them up and robbing them, and it was simply unbelievable. But, as New York goes, so goes the rest of the country. So now every major city in America has proceeded over the last 50 years to release all of their mental patients. So now we have what they're calling homeless people. It's mainly mental patients. Most of these people need psychiatric work. They need psychiatric attention. And this is just not, nobody, because you see, in the Mental Patients Project, what they decided to convince people of is that there's no such thing as mental illness. Kate's thesis was there's no such thing as mental illness. It's just because you're a little eccentric, you're a little different, and then people start calling you, bipolar. They call you this thing, that thing, and the next thing you know, you're labeled and you're insane. And so she did her whole liberation with that. But then, after she got that going and she got all the mental patients released all over the city streets, she decided to do Kid Lib. And I remember I'd be riding around in a car with her, and she'd be going, we've gotten the women thing down. We've got people all over the country now. We've planted our cells everywhere, and they're at work. But Kid Lib, Kid Lib. I didn't quite know what she meant at the moment, but I soon learned that she was talking about the sexualization of children, the pedophilia that the left loves and thinks is the great solution to adults having sexual hang-ups. Everybody in America is just so hung up about sex. They just don't understand how it should really be. And so they need to loosen up everybody. And, people should be, as with John Dewey, with Alfred Kinsey, with Alfred Kinsey, people should be sexualizing their 6-month-old children. It's all right for brothers and sisters. I'm not exaggerating here now. When I say this, it's so shocking to people that they sort of start to discount it. And you can't do that, people. You cannot do that. These people are extremely evil, and they really do mean to sexualize your children. They're doing it all the time, everywhere. The whole thing with the drag queens in the libraries, this is all from the left. They are very, very, very sick people. And we need to, this always comes with communism. Winston Churchill called socialism a philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. Its inherent virtue is the equal sharing of misery. And Karl Marx himself, the great leader of Marxism, said that socialism is the thin end of the communist wedge. Once they're socialists, he said, communism is inevitable. And this is what these people have been able to work us into over the last 50 years. It's now so weird when you see what's going on in Russia, and I see what's going on here. I feel as if Russia is trying to turn into America, and America is turning into Russia. I mean, it's just so weird to be my age. I'm 84 years old now, and to see this happening is just surreal. I just can't even believe I'm not in a nightmare here, and that reality is off somewhere else, and I'm not taking part anymore. I mean, really, one of the main things that these people are working toward is the erasure of all taboos. My sister Kate's biggest aim, one of her biggest goals, was to just erase all taboos. No taboos. Now think of that. No taboos. Pedophilia, bestiality, homosexuality, every single thing that was always a taboo in any kind of a decent, organized civilization is just gone. One of my favorite writers in England is a man named Theodore Dalrymple, and he writes, "The purpose of communist propaganda is not to persuade, convince, or inform, but to humiliate. Because when people are being told the most obvious lies and then forced to keep silent or to repeat those lies, they lose their sense of integrity and dignity, and their ability to resist anything is eroded and eventually destroyed. The society of emasculated liars is easy to control." And that is what everybody on the left is really working for. The idea that boys can be girls and girls can be boys, and they're degrading our society to the point where it's going to be totally unrecognizable in another 20 years if we don't do something about it. So
Mallory,
that's
I'm going to ask you
my starting monologue.
I want to ask you a couple questions because you triggered some thoughts in my head. I'm just looking at today, and where we are today and how we got here, because that's the name of my program, How Did We Get Here? And you have certainly laid out the things that have directed us to where we are today. What I want to know is, what role do you think the media plays in all of this? Has that been a big part of the movement that you're describing?
Well, when they would have these meetings and they would talk about infiltrating, the number one thing to infiltrate was the media and the entertainment business and Broadway and Hollywood and the places that affect our ideas of what we are as Americans. And, so they very, very early infiltrated the media. I had a housemate who was a film editor through all of my young single years in New York here, and she worked for 2020. She edited the television show 2020, and she would come home every night and cry. She would cry herself to sleep a lot because she'd say, "Mallory, they're all Marxists," and I'd say, "Oh, come on." So after a while, of course, I came to know that she was absolutely right. This was true, and that they were all Marxists, except that now Fox created a bit of a media revolution, and it's produced people like
Bill O'Reilly.
What?
Tucker Carlson. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Tucker Carlson.
Yes.
We've put out all these right wing commentators now, and we're really starting to combat this complete grip. I mean, they had a total grip on all of American thinking. Every newspaper, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, all of these papers are left-wing rags. They're just propaganda sheets. They are not newspapers.
Right. It's not really, well, there's always going to be a bias when you're reporting the news, but to me, it's always just one-sided bias. They don't really permit the other side to voice their opinion. Yeah,
I had a therapist once who it was during the Kate years when I was trying to pull away from Kate, and I'd be lying on her couch crying about this and that, and I would say, "I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to do about her. She's ruining my life. She's and my therapist just looked down at me. She was standing up. She looked down at me lying on the couch sobbing, and she said, "Why not just leave the room?" I said, "What?" She said, "Mallory, you can just leave the room." I said, wait a minute. I've been in the same room with this person since I was her roommate in childhood. I couldn't just, I've always listened to her. I'm always engaging with her. I couldn't. She said, "No, just leave the room." I said, "Well, how do I do that?" She said, "I have to go to the bathroom. I just had to remember a call I have to make. I just remembered an appointment I forgot. There are ways of leaving the room, but Mallory, you must just leave the room." And that was when my life began, was the day that I had her say that. And as far as Kate was concerned, I simply left the room.
Good.
I never had anything to do with her. When our mother died, I never had anything to do with her again.
Oh, wow. What a story. What a story. I knew that you have so much to say, and I really appreciate it. It's just been, I'm so happy to be able to share this with other people. And I hope to have you back.
I love to get it out. I love to get it out there.
Yeah, really. It's been wonderful. And you are an eyewitness to a period. I'm an eyewitness too. I was right in there, right behind you. I felt like I was in the front seat of a roller coaster as I witnessed the 60s. And I had no idea what was coming. It started out very calm in 1960, but by the end, it was like crazy town. And
and now even on the campuses, these women presidents, those were the presidents of all those schools were women. You see, you can't. Women are not the kind of leaders that men are. Men, I want to be back in a world that's really being run by men. I want the world to be run by men, and I want the society to be run by women. Women need to go back home and run society. We've lost society. Nobody has any manners and people don't know how to behave anymore. That's because the women abdicated their job of forming society.
Yes.
And so we need
I
the
do
men
have
to
a
run the
message. I
world.
do have a message for the men, and that is we need good leaders. All right. Well, I think we have to end our session here today. It's been really great being with you, and I'm glad that we finally got this recorded. And for all of you that liked it, I hope that you'll hit the like button and that you'll come back for our next session. And
I'd love that.
And if you have any questions or comments, you can reach me at how did we get here 1884 at gmail.com. Thanks again for coming, and we'll.
And my website is MalloryMillett.com. I forgot.
And MalloryMillett.com. Very good. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Nancy.
Enjoyed it so much. Bye for now.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to the How Did We Get Here podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and share this episode with your friends and family. For more information and to connect with Nancy, email howdidwegethere1884 at gmail.com.